Good morning to all of you. Welcome back to the Namaste Experience. I'm so happy to be able to join with you. I'm still here in Oaxaca, but I'll be back in Ajijic at Namaste Village tomorrow. I've been having a lovely time just walking around this colorful, beautiful village. And this morning, as I was walking around, I went out to get a coffee before we started. I found myself singing a song that I have always loved, that has always been so deep with me. And I want to share just a little bit of it with you because I think it's going to form the foundation of what we're going to share today. So just take a deep breath and listen and feel deeply these words, this prayer. Take, Lord, receive all my liberty, my memory, understanding, my entire will. Give me only your love and your grace. That's enough for me. Your love and your grace are enough for me. Are enough for me. So take a deep breath now. Love and grace are enough. That's all we need. It's all we possess. It fills us now and forever. And I want to talk about that love and that grace a little bit today, but through a particular lens. I talk rather, a lot about St. Francis of Assisi. You know that. But today we're going to talk about someone who was just as important, and that was Clare of Assisi. Someone who doesn't get mentioned nearly enough, and I believe was just as important, in some ways perhaps even more important than Francis himself. The feminine counterpoint to everything that Francis loved, cherished, shared. And she did so in just as powerful but much more quiet way. Clare, in case you don't know, was from the richest, most noble family in Assisi. And this was at a time, by the way, when the lower part of Assisi and the upper part where the nobles lived were in great conflict. In fact, when Francis was 16 years old and Clare was only 4, the lower part, the merchants, people like Francis, rose up against the people who lived in the upper part of Assisi. They killed, I think it was said, about 300 people in the upper part. It was a mini civil war, and the purpose was to overtake the castle of La Rocca, which was at the very top. And at that time, another 4-year-old boy was living, and that was actually, he was already the king of Germany and the future king of all of Europe, the Holy Roman Emperor. That's what I'm trying to say. He was the future Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick II. He was only 4 years old at that time, living in the castle above Assisi. And so the people in the lower part, including Francis, rose up against them to try and kill the king and dispel all of the nobles. Well, Frederick escaped, but Clare's family were in great danger. In fact, there is the tale of how Francis and this mob, this gang that he led, crashed into the home of Clare's family. And some members of his group wanted to kill everyone in that household. And Francis took this young 4-year-old girl and said, no one will harm her. And the family of Clare were able to escape to Perugia. And it was many years later that Clare, who was of this noble heritage, was set on fire by the example that Francis would lead after his conversion, that she ultimately escaped on Palm Sunday, very late at night. She and a companion escaped from their home, and she went and joined Francis and became the first woman to join the order and was the founder of what we now call the Poor Clares. Okay? So I wanted you to have a little bit of background of who this woman was and who she became. She was perhaps the most well-known woman in all of Europe, to the point that she would correspond with a woman named Agnes of Prague, who was the princess of Bohemia, who was also so moved by Clare's witness in her life that Agnes also escaped from her palace, went to hide in one of Clare's convents, and ultimately was so moved by the devotion and the love that she felt and experienced that she left everything behind and followed Clare and her way of life. So why am I mentioning all this? Because I believe that in one way or another, as we've been saying for a number of days now, we are called to give everything to everything, just as Francis did, as Clare did, in our own way. As Vicky said yesterday, sometimes that's in a very common, simple way, through our relationships, through our friendships. But in one way or another, we are called to give everything in order to realize that everything is within us now. So first, I want to read something that I just wrote yesterday, just a few sentences on something that really struck me about Clare, and that was what I'm calling her joyous recklessness. Imagine that for a moment. What would your life be like if you could practice joyous recklessness? Recklessness for the sake of love and joy itself. So listen to this. Clare's joyous recklessness to run in the opposite direction of the world. That's what it was. To run in the opposite direction as the direction of the world, the direction everyone else is going. But not with eyes closed, but rather with eyes fully open to the transforming power of grace. I'm going to pause there for just one moment. And I've mentioned this before, but it springs to mind, and I think it illustrates what we just heard. I'm reminded of my dear friend Roger Defoe, who I wrote about in my book, Love, God, and the Art of French Cooking. Roger is an amazing chef who lives outside Toronto, about an hour and a half outside Toronto. And if you go to his B&B and you eat in his restaurant and you go to the men's room, I don't know if the ladies have this or not, but if you go to the men's room, there is a wonderful picture, a drawing, poster on the wall, and it shows hundreds of sheep, white sheep, as they all run as fast as they can toward a cliff. And in this picture you see many of them going over the edge of the cliff all the way to the bottom, and you see one black sheep in the middle going the opposite direction, and the caption says, excusez-moi, excusez-moi, as the black sheep makes its way. That's you. That's each one of you. We are all the black sheep going in the opposite direction of the world. And that is something to celebrate, and it's certainly something that Francis and Clare celebrated. Okay, Clare believed in what she called perfect poverty, which meant perfect dependence on grace. Perfect dependence on grace. And that's why she fought for years to be granted what they called the privilege of poverty. The privilege of poverty was something that was so important to Clare, in which the Pope and the bishops were so reticent to give her. And the idea was that Clare would not be forced to take anything from anyone, property, money, farmland, animals. She wanted to live so attached to the grace of the divine that no one would force her, because they thought that they would be safer. They thought that they would starve without land and property. Clare wanted none of it. She wanted this joyous recklessness that she had experienced through her mentor, Francesco. So, I want to read just a little bit more from Clare herself. This is something that she wrote, and it's about contemplation, which tomorrow will be our day of silence and contemplation at Namaste Village. But I think it just in a few sentences, Clare is able to illustrate so beautifully the prayerful nature of this divine recklessness and perfect poverty that she sought. Transform your whole being entirely by contemplation into the image of the Godhead itself, so that you too may feel what his friends feel, what God's friends feel, as they taste the hidden sweetness which God himself has reserved from the beginning for those who love. One more time. Transform your whole being entirely by contemplation into the image of the Godhead itself, so that you too may feel what God's friends feel as they taste the hidden sweetness which God has reserved from the very beginning for those who love. The hidden sweetness of love. The transforming grace that comes to us when we seek only one thing, because we realize that only one thing is real, love itself, and that I am that love. So in reality, I'm seeking my true self, my true reality, the reality based on love. Clare was such a brilliant example. I'm looking so forward, just in a few weeks from now, going to Assisi with 40 people, 43 if you include me and Father Larry and Meshe. I know a few of you are going to be joining me. But one of my favorite places, probably my very favorite, is the Chapel of San Damiano, which is where Clare lived, which was the first church that Francis himself rebuilt with his own hands. But to be in this simple place where she wrote those words, where she felt that reality, she felt that transforming grace. Talk about a privilege. That is the greatest privilege of love, to follow the example of someone who was so transformed by grace. So we have a few minutes left. I know Vicky shares my love for this amazing woman. So Vicky, I'm going to turn it over to you. I would love to hear what you would like to share about Clare.
Oh, thank you, Brother James. Thank you. You know, speaking about Francis and Clare or Jesus, it's like talking about our family. Just like looking here in the room and seeing our family, it's just so full of delight. And I mean, when you were talking about Clare and that reckless spirit, one time when I was in Assisi, not with you, another time, I had called Clare. I said, Clare, I'm going to Assisi. You want to meet me there? And she did. And we were visiting all the chapels, and we went to San Damiano. And for whatever reason, it wasn't really open at that time to the public. But the nun in charge said, oh, you look so sincere. We're going to let you in. So we went in, and Clare jumps into her bed because the nun left us alone there. And Claire's going behind all, they have it ported off so you can't go into some places where she was. And I thought, I love you, Claire. I just love the way you're just reckless. Anyway, and but what you said earlier about relationship, it's really in relationship. It's relationship with certainly the Christ of our own being, but we find that best with the love we have for one another. And it isn't even necessary for it to be a person. We find it when you were talking about contemplation. That's for me a state of abiding in the presence, in the awareness that we are the light, joined in this light, the all with the all. And it made me realize and remember the times I have felt that most clearly in certain relationships. And one of them was in my relationship with my dog, Mo. Do you remember Mo, James? So I had this little
Yes,
white
of course
dog.
I do.
Mo is 17 years old. He had been sickly from the time he was a little baby, but we got him. And he was resilient, and he just always followed me everywhere. He was like a quiet symphony in the background wherever I went, just on my little tail. And at the end, he had been 17 years and he was ready to go home. And he wasn't able to walk anymore, and he couldn't see all that well. And I got a little carriage and I carried him in the carriage around with me from room to room because he always used to follow me. I didn't want to leave him. But the last 40 days, it was exactly 40 days, where he couldn't get up or walk or any of that. And we had a swing, in fact, the swing we have here in the backyard. And I sat with Mo in my lap every day for 40 days. And we gazed at each other, really simply gazed with love and appreciation. It's gonna make me cry now. We just, and he couldn't see that well, but I could feel he could see and I could see, and there was no film over his eyes. And we were abiding in love for maybe, I'd say 5 or 6 hours a day in between, whatever I was doing in the house with the kids and all the rest of it. But it was in that relationship or joining in love, nothing else but love. And that's just a dog. But we do it with each other when we gaze and abide with the light in one another. And it brings us to life. It brought me to life. Those 40 days were probably one of the happiest set of days in my lifetime. I'll remember them always because it was so full of happiness and full of light. And when it was time to go, I knew it. I could feel it. His breath changed. And in a moment, he took a breath and he relaxed right home, right into spirit and me with him. But how many times and how often every day we really do have that chance to abide in love with one another. Doesn't have to be some big fancy reading or any kind of special activity. It's the receiving of one another as the love of the Creator, as the love of our Father. When we receive that, we fill it in ourselves, it fills up. And it leads us to more grace, to more expression, to more peace, to more just being and going about whatever we have to do by grace. I think grace might be the language of spirit. Grace is the love of God acted out through us, as us. It's by grace that we live. It's by grace that things are done. And for me, when you talk about poverty, I really would like to give up everything except the actions that come from grace and let go of all the other ideas of what should be done, what needs to be done, who I should speak to or go or any of that, and wait for that grace. And when that grace comes, it comes with welcome and invitation. And then whoever we meet, the other day I was in the pool with these ladies that I've just really met. and who are very secular, particularly secular. And when one of the ladies grabbed me and introduced me to her nephew, and she said, "This is my sister." It just delighted me so much that she felt that I felt that too. And we would never spoken. They're not interested in spiritual things. And I trust that. It doesn't matter. The conversation never matters. The communication happens with what you're talking about, relationship and love. And the value of what we do here each day, we join together and we love each other and we appreciate each other's dedication, each other's dependency on the love that we share. And in this time, if no other time in the day, our lives stop and we listen for that word of love. We listen for it, we wait for it, and we can feel it. And as a family in relationship to one another with this single purpose and this single goal, we light up the whole world. I know that we do. There are little pockets and families all over time, I'm sure, of Christ coming alive, Christ stepping right into action right here, stepping in and as the kingdom. And we have the gift of seeing that through one another and realize that we are that in humility, in simplicity, in simple joy that depends on the love that we share. If we have no idea what God is, if we can abide with one another and appreciate one another, look at each other's eyes, rest in each other's being, then we find that place that's a center of what life is, of all is. So thanks, everybody. I see that with all of you. I see it every day, and I thank you. And it is the nourishment. When Jesus said, "These are the living waters I have meet ye know not of," this is the nourishment of Christ coming alive as us in our midst around us, that gives us the eyes to see it in each other and everywhere. Because no matter the disguise, this is the reality. Okay, Brother James, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Francis. Thank you. It's in the joining. The joy of who we are flourishes in our joining.
Amen.
Amen.
And I'm really glad that you brought up our friend Clare. Clare, not of Assisi, but Clare of Boston, who was such a dear. We were blessed to have her at Namaste Village when we first opened, her and her wonderful husband, Steph, and great memory. And I can just see her going through the roped area, laying down on the bed where Clare of Assisi used to sleep, where she actually took her last breath. I could just see her doing exactly that. And I'm also so glad that you brought up the word gaze when referring to your wonderful dog, Mo, because this was something that was a foundation for Clare. She had 4 practices and that she wrote about that we still know of, and those practices were 4 words: gaze, consider, contemplate, and imitate. It was the process through which St. Clare was able to experience that divine spark in everyone, in every moment. It would begin by simply gazing softly, intimately, at whatever was in front of her. It could have been another sister, it could have been a flower. But to gaze, to look with soft eyes, and then to consider the possibility that grace was alive in that moment, in that person, in that flower. Grace was coming to life. And then to contemplate that grace, to not think about it so much with the mind, but to contemplate in a mystical sense, to feel really. To contemplate in this way is to feel something deeply. And it is in that feeling then that we finally are able to imitate that grace, to be graceful, to be grace-filled with everyone in every moment. So I'm glad that you reminded me of that, of those 4 practices of Clare, always beginning with that simple gaze of love. And so we now enter into our day, gazing upon the beloved, gazing upon the extension of love that we see in every moment. And we love you all. And we say together, Amen, 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 y punto. Have a beautiful day, everyone. We'll see you again tomorrow. Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep them
Namaste.
laughing.
Keep it laughing, Ron. Love you all.
Adios.
Adios.